So James, today is your last day in the Christchurch office. You are heading to Auckland to open our new office there.
Yeah, very excited.
Someone asked me recently why we're moving into Auckland, and I said, well, basically, we've got this really great guy in our team, James, who I think one day might be on the cover of Forbes magazine because he's that brilliant. And I said, we're basically just spending a ton of money to give him a project, a big challenge, so that we can keep him. So here we are.
That's very flattering, Ellie, thank you.
So what's a mechanical engineer doing as a managing director of a digital marketing agency?
That's a good question. It's been a little bit of a kind of roundabout path to getting here. I guess my path to this point has been, I studied mechanical engineering at university, as just mentioned. I thought midway through my last year that I'd have a crack at starting a small business. It was just something that I was quite interested in. It ended up getting a bit of steam behind it, and I just thought, as I approached the last year of my degree, I thought, I'll give myself 12 months to work in this business full time. I'll get the degree as a fallback just in case it all goes tits up, and I'll see how it goes. And I ended up doing that for 12 months, and it went well enough that I got this dangerous feeling that maybe this is what I'd do for the rest of my life. It was just a really enjoyable experience going through creating a product from scratch, creating a brand, and trying to figure out what it actually means, what it means to people, and how to get people invested in the idea and how to generate revenue effectively. And yeah, a few years in, I kind of started to remove myself from the operational side of the business more and more. And the friend that I brought in to handle all of that started doing a way better job than I ever could, and I was completely useless in that role. And my role in the business has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And as that started to happen, I started looking for potential employment. And so I saw the job come up at Mint. I knew this is what I want to do, as far as I want to be exposed to a bunch of business owners who are going through this, like a similar kind of path to what I did, albeit most of them much further on than what I was experiencing, with established businesses but looking to grow or looking to overcome some sort of challenge through marketing. I kind of had an idea on the flavour that kind of Mint had coming in, and I ended up here 2.5 years ago.
Yep, and you've been a real top performer ever since.
Apparently.
So James, you are an avid reader. You consistently give me lists of books that I should read, which is always welcome. If there was a book or two that you could get everyone on your team in Auckland to read, which would they be?
Deep Work by Cal Newport. I really like everything that Cal Newport writes. He's a really, just really thorough author. And it's really satisfying to read because he leaves no stone unturned. But the gist of Deep Work is basically the start of the book is him convincing you that the ability to single task and focus deeply on one task at a time is a rare and valuable skill. And especially as more and more of the economy moves into kind of knowledge work stuff, that is the thing that is responsible for maximizing your output as a knowledge worker. Basically, long uninterrupted periods of focused work is the start of the book. The middle of it is kind of him explaining biologically why your brain can't multitask, and that you're much better off focusing on one thing till completion and then moving on to the next thing. And then the end of the book is kind of some really practical tips for how to implement that, because it's all well and good saying, we understand this concept that like single tasking and really focusing is really valuable, but it's no good when you get back to work and the path of least resistance is just to be swamped by emails and just trying to chip away at them, and before you know it, you're like a week's gone by and you haven't like spent an hour focusing on one task the entire way through.
So James, I have heard you talk a lot about the idea of grit, and I've absolutely seen you embody grit. And I've seen you praise others when they do the same. So it seems to be something that you really value in people. And I'm wondering, has there been a time or an instance where you have gone through something and thought, well, not going to do that again. That wasn't worth the grit. It wasn't worth the, all the hard work, and you just decided, nope, won't be doing that again. When grit lost.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest example in my life, or the first thing that springs to mind, is the engineering degree, right? So it's kind of like I had an inkling 3/4 of the way through my degree that I didn't want to be an engineer. As I started seeing kind of what the actual work involved, I still loved the idea of engineering, but the reality didn't quite match the expectation. And I think it kind of came to a head where I was in my final year, and there was one engineering job that I was quite keen on, because it had like a rotation through various business units within this big organisation, and it was like a chicken factory up in Matamata. And I got through the final round for the interview, and we went and did like an on-site half-day thing. And we got in there, and it sounded great on paper, and then they're like, yeah, so this is where the magic happens, kind of thing. And you go in there, and it's like 1,000 specialized machines all just like ripping chickens to bits, kind of thing. And it's kind of like,
Wow.
oh, like this is the only job that like jumped out at me as as an opportunity that I really, really wanted on paper. So I put a bit of effort into that, and I got into the final interview kind of thing, and I was like, I think I'd be pretty unhappy doing this work. And it's not just obviously the killing chickens is pretty unpalatable, but just the reality of what that job was going to be didn't quite match. And I thought I was doing a good thing by going through and finishing my degree, kind of, I guess, as like a risk mitigation thing. If it didn't work out with this other kind of branch, I'd just go back and be an engineer kind of thing. But looking back, I probably could have quit that earlier. I had the conviction to quit it earlier, but I didn't. But yeah, that's one time where I've pursued something for probably longer than I should have.
What has been one of the best investments that you've made? So that could be time, money, energy.
I like this question. It's quite tough to answer when it's like rank the number one thing. So I can't tell you that, but I can tell you what my most worthwhile, most recent investment has been, if that ticks the box.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Let's hear it.
So I've become really interested recently in there's this whole movement towards like the quantified self. So like being able to measure everything about your biology and use that information to make better decisions for your life. And it's a bit woo-woo, some of it. But what I quite like is there's a biomarker called heart rate variability, which is the how much your heart rate fluctuates every single minute. So if your heart's beating at 60 BPM, you'd think that it would be a pretty consistent kind of 1 second interval in between heartbeats, but in reality it's kind of fluctuating from like 1.1 seconds down to 0.9, and every time you breathe it goes up and down. And that heart rate variability is a really good biomarker for your overall nervous system health. And your ability to switch between kind of when needed, your fight or flight kind of instinct, and then when it's not needed, your rest and digest kind of system. One of the most recent worthwhile investments that I've made is a way to measure that. It's just a heart rate monitor, but a really accurate one. And the idea is that you take like a baseline reading and you see how that changes over time, and you kind of tag each reading with like things that are of interest. So if it's like I had a few beers last night kind of thing, or I went to bed late, or I had a poor sleep, or I skipped the gym kind of thing, or like anything that could be potentially affecting, or I had a really stressful day at work.
Yeah.
And just being able to quantify that and see how it affects your overall like functioning as a human being kind of thing has been really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it runs the risk of being just information for information's sake, and you're not going to do anything with it. But I've been doing it for probably about a month now, and I found it quite good, because you've got an objective measure of like, I'm functioning like a potato today, biologically. It's probably not the day to like push it. Like I'll probably like do what I need to do and go home and make sure I rest properly. And then other days you're 10 out of 10 ready to go, and you know that if you have to, today's the day to push it, like push the boat out a little bit further. So that is probably the most worthwhile recent investment that I've made. It was like $100.
Okay, yeah. And so what kind of output do you think that'll have on your life, or what kind of effect do you think that'll have on your life?
I think it's just putting quantification around something that you already kind of feel anyway. You know yourself when you come in and you're like, I'm not feeling my best today. It's the benefit that I'm expecting that to have in my life is identifying these triggers for like what makes me feel stressed, what leads to these like periods of like feeling like I'm not at 100%, and then let's remove those things within reason to try and optimize for like peak performance as often as possible kind of thing. Because I think it's quite frustrating to feel like like you've got all the tools to be able to do a job really well, but you're just not the biological machine's not working well enough to get it done, kind of thing. So I think that's what I want out of it, and maybe that's that kind of engineering side coming back out. I don't know, but that's what I'm hoping to get out of it.
So a really big part of your role is acting as an advisor on marketing and digital marketing. What is a resounding piece of bad advice that you think some people get, not from you, but from others in our industry when it comes to digital marketing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the thing that pops up quite a bit, talking to different business owners who have dealt with different different professionals from different organisations over the years, is that the recurring theme seems to be this kind of Maslow's hammer thing, where it's like the over-reliance on familiar tools, and it's not necessarily people making bad recommendations because they're not knowledgeable enough or they don't have the skills to be making these recommendations. I think it's the result of this cognitive bias, which Maslow's hammer is just that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So in our context, it's kind of like if you're a specialist Facebook marketer, of course the answer to every single business problem is Facebook marketing. Similarly, if you're an SEO agency, of course they're going to tell you that you have to be investing a hideous amount of money every single month in SEO, otherwise your website's going to fall off the internet, kind of thing. So I think that's the trap that I see a lot of people falling into, and I think probably 80% of the bad advice that's dished out is caused by that. Yeah,
okay. All right, we're going to end on a really fruity question. So if you could put a billboard in some high traffic area and it could get a message out there to millions or billions of people, what would you put on that billboard? What would you want to tell the world?
That's a good question, and I'm gonna steal the basis for my answer from the same place that you stole this question from, which is Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss. I don't know who this was attributed to at all. I couldn't tell you who the quote's from, but I really like the idea that's encapsulated in motion before emotion. And I think what it means to me is that motivation normally creates itself as you get started with something, and that your relative level of motivation to do something that you've decided ahead of time is something that needs to be done, whether it's like a hard project at work or looking after yourself by going to the gym or eating healthy, just because you're not feeling motivated to do it at that point in time doesn't mean that it's not the right time to do it. And normally once you get started, so if it's a really hard task at work, for example, you get 5 minutes into it and you're kind of like, oh yeah, no, I remember now why this is important and I'm motivated to do it. Or once you're at the gym, as soon as you're there, you're like, oh, I'm glad I came, and the motion has created the motivation that you need. Whereas if it's purely emotional decision, if you let that get in the way of, if you let that undermine the decisions you've made that are good for you ahead of time, it almost always leads to a bad outcome. So motion before emotion, I think, is it for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard a similar concept, which is where you kind of zombie your way through difficult tasks. So don't overthink it, just do like what a zombie would do.
Yeah.
So searching for motivation is futile because most of the things that we do every day, we don't do because we're motivated. We don't get up and go to work because we're motivated, and we certainly don't stay in bed because I'm kind of unmotivated about going to work today. So when we're applying it to things that are difficult to us, like going to the gym, you just do like a zombie would do and just go to the gym, like motion before emotion. I like that. Yeah, cool. It's a good concept. I guess you've got quite a long to-do list today, being your last day. I did kind of think about imparting you with some advice, but I'm sure you've got plenty of unsolicited advice coming your way about business ownership. I just really hope that the juice is worth the squeeze, and I'm just looking forward to seeing you flourish. I know you will.
Oh, thanks so much for the opportunity.